All right, welcome back to One True Podcast. Zach Smith with me as always with his mood lighting. How about
Oh, look at that. I mean, we're recording much later than normal, so I've got to, set the mood. Yeah, set the vibe somehow. It's,
Do we need some like romantic music or anything?
Like some careless whisper? Just can you bring us in with some careless whisper?
Yeah, I like that. Maybe Win can make that happen. It's probably a copyright thing, though. I
could sing it. No, I couldn't sing it. I'm not going to do that.
Let's not do that. And it's kind of funny. We had Keff on way back before the season started because Baylor obviously opened with Texas State, but happy to have Keff Ciardello back with us. He does a podcast obviously on Texas State, covers the Bobcats, writes about them, all of that. So he's all over the Bobcats. But Keff, thanks for hopping on with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a minute. We both all three of us went through a long season, huh?
Yes, it's true. It's true. I'm feeling it too. Ready for December to start, which is tomorrow. So guys, a lot has happened since way back when we recorded that podcast in August, I guess it was. So let's start with the latest news. Came out today as we record the podcast Thursday. That Jake Spavital will be Baylor's new offensive coordinator. So Jake is a guy that Keff is familiar with as the former Texas State head coach, spent 4 years as the Bobcats head coach, and then was fired after the 2022 season, went to Cal as their offensive coordinator, which is where he's been this season, and now will be Dave Aranda's third offensive coordinator in 5 seasons. So what's the likelihood that this one sticks in y'all's mind, and what can we expect from a Spavital offense? Keff, I mean, what should Baylor fans come to expect here?
Yeah, well, he when he came into Texas State in 2018, he was billed very much as this high-powered offense, spread offense, coming from the Mike Leach tree, not necessarily from Mike Leach, but Dana Holgorsen and others that are in that area. And so that's what Texas State fans were expecting a lot of when he got there, a lot of that spread, fast offense. And it would show flashes of that, but it was really more conservative than things you would see at West Virginia or his first stint at Cal or at A&M. And I think a lot of that had to do with caliber of players too, that he would get in there. He had dealt with a plethora of NFL quarterbacks. And I mean, that's a testament to him as well, recruiting those players and developing them and everything. But he had a lot of the talent to uplift a lot of those stats. And so it was kind of the same deal you just said with Dave Aranda, his third offensive coordinator in 5 years. That was kind of Spav's tenure at Texas State, where he cycled through offensive coordinators. He started out with Bob Stitt his first year, and they ended up averaging, I think it was 18 points a game that first season with Bob Stitt in there. And if you don't know who Bob Stitt is, he's kind of he's known for pioneering the jet sweep at the Colorado School of Mines way back in like 2010, around that time. So he had Bob Stitt had a pretty big reputation. Came in 1 year and was let go, and I know that was pretty contentious when it happened. Then he brings in Jacob Peeler to be the offensive coordinator, but Peeler's not calling plays. Peeler was here for 2 years, great recruiter, brought in a lot of terrific receivers. Now he's the receiver coach at Mizzou, but he wasn't able to call the plays. That's why he ended up leaving Texas State to go be the receivers coach somewhere else, because Spav always called the plays. And when it was his turn to call the plays his final year, 2022, because he didn't bring in offense coordinators last year. He was the offense coordinator, and he, like I say, call the plays when it was his job to run the offense. It wasn't what everybody was expecting. Again, there wasn't really the spread offense. It was a very conservative look, a lot of screens, a lot of 5-yard passes and everything. But he went to Cal and he got a little bit of that back. It didn't blow the doors off of anybody, but they did improve from what Cal was last year to this year a little bit. So he still has that in him. He's still a really good coach. And even when he was let go here, I felt it was time for that to happen. But I said at the time, he's going to go on and be a really good offense coordinator somewhere, because that's what he was before. And he's still really young. And I think he specifically chose Baylor. He wasn't like let go from Cal, as far as I know, that with that situation. And I know he liked Texas, specifically Central Texas. So it didn't surprise me that he's back at Baylor. So I think it's actually a pretty cool hire for the Bears. It's a good way for him to get back in and reassert himself in an area where, you know, it had a bad look in the Central Texas area. I know Waco's pretty far from San Marcos, but close vicinity enough where he can kind of get back into this area and reassert himself. And, you know, he's trying to prove himself just the way Dave Aranda is trying to prove himself with people are assuming one last season with it. So even though it didn't work out here, I think it's actually a pretty good fit for Baylor and for Jake Spavital.
Before you chime in, so I just have to remark on one thing that Keff said, which was calling him Spav. I like that, by the way. It's like Sarkeesian at Texas. I mean, you don't want to say the whole mouthful. You just want to call him Sark. So that's better for headlines. Spav. We're gonna steal that for sure.
Oh, do it. I definitely did not coin it. That was inherited in San Marcos from his other stops. He goes by, like, people call him Spav. Like, it's not just like a thing that people say in the media or anything. Like he legit
that's
goes
his
by
nickname.
it. Yeah. And he's a great guy. You'll have fun interviewing him and everything. He's a really good interview. Even when times were really tough in press conferences and everything, he was always very professional. His opening remarks were always like 5 minutes minimum. You know, he was really good talker. Will always give you a good quote for sure.
Okay, cool. Zach, I mean, Baylor wanted someone with head coaching experience to be their new OC. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, is this a good fit?
I mean, on paper, it seems like a perfect fit. I mean, I think that Jeff Grimes' offense, for as good as it could be, it never, this is the chance for Baylor to kind of open things up and kind of let the offense of the future, so to speak, come in and really make it fun to be at McLean Stadium. And I think that Spavital gives them that opportunity to do that, just that. And I'm really curious to see how much of a head coach role he takes over, because we know that Dave Aranda is going to take over more of the defensive play calling. So just how big a piece is he going to be, kind of as a second head coach, really, on that sideline on the offensive side of the ball. So, I think it's a really good hire. I think, like Keff said, he fits Baylor. He fits kind of where the direction that they want to go, and kind of some of the pieces. I can look at his California team and kind of say, all right, this guy looks like Dom Richardson, and this guy looks like, so I can see what they're thinking with the pieces they already have, and probably some pieces that they want to bring in. So I think it's a good hire, and I think it's going to serve Baylor and Dave Aranda really well.
Yeah, and of course they wanted to get it done quickly, and they did. I mean, the transfer portal opens Monday? Is that right? Yeah. So I mean, I think you want to have a guy in here so that, if you are a quarterback or a receiver or running back or whatever, you can say, okay, now I know who I'm going to be working for, so to speak, and what kind of schemes that he might be running and all that kind of thing. So Mack Rhoades opted to zig where others zagged on Black Sunday in college football. Several other coaches around the country, including around the state of Texas, got their pink slips, but Baylor chose to bring back Dave Aranda following a disappointing 3-9 season. So being patient with college football coaches is not really the norm today in college football. I mean, and this was definitely an unpopular decision among a lot of Baylor fans. So now Aranda is really under the gun. What kind of record do you think Baylor needs for him to make it to a 6th season? Zach, start us off here.
I think at minimum he needs to go to a bowl game. That's the floor. And
Which is mediocrity. I mean, it's 6-6. You can get there,
but it's improvement. I mean, it's hard to get any worse than you were this year, but it's improvement,
right?
And yeah, I think minimum it's a bowl game, but I think really, and we've talked about this before, I know on the pod before, with Texas and Oklahoma losing, there is an opportunity for whoever is going to be the big dog to step up. And I don't think Baylor is going to do that in 1 year, but Aranda and others have been very open that this freshman class is going to win a Big 12 title. And I think that going further than a bowl game and just like seeing kind of a clear path to what you're building and having a big picture end goal in mind, I think that's a kind of a thing that maybe fans and maybe Mack has kind of his eyes set on, like, all right, next year, maybe it's a bowl game. Then the year after, maybe it's pushing for the Big 12 title. Like, I think as long as there's some progression, I think Aranda is going to be okay. But, we'll see what I say next year.
Yeah, Keff, when you were, I'm sure on Sunday, things were probably popping up on your phone and stuff, when that news pops up that Baylor's retaining Dave Aranda, what was kind of your reaction?
Well, I would be lying if there weren't a ton of people around San Marcos that look at that. I mean, we talked about it the last time I was on the pod, the connection that Kenny has with his dad being at Baylor, he has a sister who graduated from Baylor. There's a lot of connections there. So it was like, if that job opens up, of course, it's going to raise a lot of alerts. But I think it's even more interesting that Dave Aranda is on this prove it deal, because I'm with Zach. Bowl game for sure. I think you bring in somebody like Spavital and you want the offense to be more exciting. So I think that plays into it too. An exciting brand of ball plus a bowl eligibility, winning record. I think that would be pretty big for him. But if it doesn't work out for Dave Aranda and Kenny does have another successful season at Texas State, 7-5 is successful here for the record. Then I think that will be, I think then if Baylor does move on from Aranda and that job is open, I think that's more likely that Kenny would get looked at. It being this year, I don't know if Baylor would look at 7-5, look at 1 year. He's 35 years old, or he's about to be 35. He's not even 35 yet, like a couple days away. He's a younger guy, so maybe they're wouldn't have been quite ready to make that move, but who knows 2024 how that all plays out. So it'll be interesting to watch this whole thing develop.
Yeah, I said on the pod here recently that I think any good athletic director always carries around, maybe it's a note on their phone, maybe it's an actual piece of paper that has a short list just in case something happens, and I bet I would be safe in betting that GJ Kenny is probably on that list, of Mack.
Probably on a few, honestly, not just Mack.
Yeah, for sure. He's a coach on the rise.
But he loves Texas, so
yeah, exactly.
If it's Baylor, he's going to look at that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, the Baylor connections. You guys mentioned, obviously the offense has to get better, but especially with Aranda taking over defensive play calls, I mean, the defense better show a lot of improvement too, because it was statistically it was even worse than the offense this year. Now, I actually think the offense's failures sometimes led to the defensive failures. It all was one big toilet bowl spiral, basically. But there you go. So guys, the transfer portal really allows teams today to kind of completely reinvent themselves from 1 year to the next. In college basketball, I've compared it to like JUCO ball, because sometimes you're flipping your roster over completely. Now, nobody flipped it over quite like Texas State did, maybe Colorado, but so Zach, how aggressive does Baylor need to be when this transfer portal starts opening up this next week, and what are some of the biggest areas of need?
Well, I think you can look at it two ways. I don't think you're going to see a lot of incoming transfers on defense. I think they really like where they're at on defense, and there's a lot of young players that have already committed to come back on that side of the ball. Offense is a completely different, animal. obviously. New coordinator, new scheme, all that fun stuff. So very aggressive offensively, especially on the offensive line. I know everybody's going to say that because everybody needs offensive linemen, but I think especially Baylor. And I'm really this whole transfer portal and recruiting with Spav coming in. It's fascinating to me because Keff. I'm glad we have Keff on right now because I have a question for him. I think the last two recruiting classes for Spav in San Marcos, did they have 4 total high school recruits or something ridiculous like that? They had 4 total high school recruits and like 35 transfers. Is that correct?
Yeah, the 2 classes combined. That sounds correct. I can remember the last class specifically. There was 2 high school recruits, and I feel like it was about the same deal with the last one. Both classes had around 20 transfers. So Spavital is very familiar with the transfer portal, and he did get some really good players out of the transfer portal here at Texas State. They weren't all hits. There were some misses, but he is familiar with the transfer portal, and he, and I was kind of talking about this where the talent level at his previous schools were pretty good. The resources here weren't what they were there. And so he wasn't able to get a lot of those players here. Now, a lot of that depends on what kind of recruiting you do, but he was still able to retain some pretty good players that are even still here that he grabbed out of the transfer portal. So yeah, he's very familiar with that for sure.
I mean, and I guess we saw how that kind of ended at Texas State with his transfer players, but I think that Baylor is again a different animal. I think he can maybe attract some more. And I know it's not all him doing the recruiting and bringing in people in the transfer portal. Dave has a big deal with that, and they announced like an hour ago when they officially announced the hire that Sean Bell is staying around. He's going to be the tight ends coach, and I know he's got some very deep roots in the Texas high school coaching kind of tree. So I to answer your question, I think especially on offense, Baylor needs to be very aggressive in the transfer portal, and I think a guy like Spav sets him up pretty well to do just that.
Well, and obviously one area that could be a need, I mean, I would say probably is a need. I guess it's how you feel about Sawyer Roberts or not. But they are losing their starting quarterback. Blake Shapen has entered the portal. We'll see if anything changes with Spav coming on, if maybe Blake changes his mind. I guess you can do that. Right. But I did think it was interesting. I don't know if you guys saw this quote from Mack Rhoades, where he was talking about, so at some press conference, some Nebraska press conference, they were talking about transfer portal and NIL and all of that. And he said, yeah, well, a good quarterback now will run you $1.5 million, $2 million. I mean, it's just like, what? What are we doing? I mean, it's so, I mean, we're into college football full on free agency.
It's professional football at this point.
Yeah, it really is. And so you talk about Baylor having to be aggressive. I mean, Baylor has to be aggressive, I mean, it's going to have to pay out for some of these guys if it wants the better guys. And of course, I mean, Zach, you and I know that they're planning on kind of trying to do that, to get a little more aggressive. They feel like, they haven't been quite at the same level as some of these other schools.
Yeah. I mean, but where is that money going to come from? There's a bunch more questions that, need to be answered before we actually get there.
Yeah. And your point about Spav and how many recruit or transfers he had at Texas State is good and insightful. That said, I mean, I do think recruiting to Baylor is a little different than recruiting to Texas State. I mean, I think, at some point, you're always going to want to have a fair amount of high school seniors in your recruiting class, because, you want to bring in good talent and develop it and get those kids in the weight room and, get you some 4 stars. I mean, Baylor doesn't get a lot of 5 stars, but maybe you can get some 4 stars in there, and get them started from the outset. A guy like, Caden Jenkins or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, who might have even been a 3-star, was he, Zach?
He was a 3-star, correct?
Yeah. So, And that's been really Baylor's MO for a long time, is getting those kind of players and building them up and developing them. So, you know, they don't generally compete with the Alabamas and Texases of the world for the recruits. But anyway, speaking of Texas, guys, we do have the Big 12 championship game this week. And we have the Longhorns and Oklahoma State facing off at Jerry World in Arlington. So, you know, rather than have y'all break this game down, let's just say the Longhorns, they're favored, they win. Does that put them in the college football playoff? What do you think, Kev?
I think so. For me, I mean, when I look at them, especially how they've played recently and later on, or the second half of the season, they look really strong, and I think they've earned a spot in that college football playoff. I mean, they've have some really good wins on their schedule this season. That I think
an Alabama win looms large for sure.
Huge. And I mean, that's when we're talking about which of these two teams would you put in between Alabama and Texas? Well, it's Texas won. To me, it's pretty simple. You know, it's the head-to-head matchup. But I know there's a lot more that goes into it. You know, of course, strength of schedule, and there's a lot. And of course, they're going to want some SEC representation.
Yeah, you think
in the playoffs? So I think that's not going to bode well for Texas. But for me, yeah, I do think Texas has played their way into the playoff if they win.
Zach, I feel like I know your answer already, but go ahead.
I think I'm wearing a burnt orange undershirt today. If they win, they're in. That they deserve it. They should be in. And I think that Texas is a team that if they get in the playoff, I think that they can give any team in the top 6, you know, a run for their money, even Georgia, even Alabama. Now, I'm an agent of chaos, and I'd love to see Alabama win and Oregon win and Iowa win, especially Iowa. So I just want to see pure chaos and just, you know, burn it all down. But for Texas, if they win, they should be in. And they're gonna run for they're gonna go for a national title this year.
I love the fact that you are a fan of chaos. I have to tell you about a copy editor we had one time who was also a big fan of chaos. But
root for the storyline. It will be just, you know, I want those people in you know, the Texas hotel room, that the committee. I want them to sweat. They need to make some hard decisions. Don't make it easy.
What complicates matters for Texas is just the fact that there are so many undefeateds this year, you know, and then some really good, like, 1-loss teams, including themselves, obviously. So yeah, I do think it helps Texas's case that it's Texas and it hasn't been in it in a while. And you know, if it were basically anybody else in the Big 12 with the same credentials, I'm not sure they're getting in just because brand name, you know? I mean, I think brand names matter in this college football playoff thing. I mean, I'm thinking back. So Zach asked me the other day, Keff, you may have followed this back then, but he asked me, why is our podcast One True Podcast? and I was telling him about how, you know, back in the very first year of the college football playoff, the Big 12 had this slogan, One True Champion. And it was a whole big mess, big kerfuffle with Baylor and TCU and which team they were going to promote. Baylor beat TCU, but TCU was ranked ahead of them in the CFP most of the year. And then the very last week, they all won. Baylor won big. TCU won big. TCU fell from 4th to 6th, and Baylor leapfrogged them. And I guess they finally said, I guess maybe the head-to-head does matter, and put Baylor at 5th. But I think Baylor and TCU got left out because they weren't brand names. And Ohio State ended up getting the 4th spot and ended up winning the national championship. So there you go. There's a little history lesson. I mean, not that ancient history, but yeah.
Pod history for sure. Because when I was on Zoom, when it was pulling up, I was like, One True, I wonder what that is. So I'm actually really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So
it's good to know.
It's a little wink and sort of a lot of Baylor fans, Baylor and TCU fans in particular, remember One True Champion a lot, because it was such a joke, and Bob Bowlesby got just, dragged for it, and it became just sort of this big joke, and so we adopted it as our podcast name, and it lives on. But yeah, there you go. So Kev, as we said, Texas State going bowling 7-5. Do you have a guess on where they end up? I guess those are announced Sunday, right?
Yeah, Frisco. I'm thinking Frisco. That's there's been a mutual relationship, I guess is one way I could put it, between the two. Like all season, they've been keeping their eyes on the Bobcats all year. There's others that are in the mix. I know NOLA is in the mix. I know there's a lot. That's a pretty coveted one, being in New Orleans and everything. In Frisco, it's, not too far from San Marcos, have fans that could travel to there. So that seems like the likeliest destination. I don't have any inclination about which one it is going to be, more so than the other, but that's from the reading the tea leaves. That's what it seems like. It's going to be Frisco, which would be nice for me. A nice easy drive. I don't mind NOLA. I love NOLA. 5 hours, not that bad of a drive, but I'd rather stay in Texas.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, that's we've I've covered a lot of bowl games over the years, and the nice tropical locations are certainly fun and stuff, but sometimes after a long season you do appreciate a short bit of travel, where it's not quite as cumbersome. And obviously, I would think that would allow a lot of Texas State fans to go to the game.
Yeah, which is big. That's one reason that Frisco does like Texas State. They've seen the 20% increase in attendance this season. They set a record for total attendance in a season for Texas State. And so Frisco sees that and they like that. But I as much as I like tropical places, we just saw Coastal was announced for the Hawaii Bowl. And that's a Sun Belt team. I got to tell you, I'm really glad I don't have to fly all the way to Hawaii or try to make those kind of travel. As much as I love,
maybe the only person in America that's going, dang,
you don't want to go to Hawaii.
I don't want to go to
Hawaii.
Hawaii.
I'm tired.
I hear you. It is a long season.
My bet is Hawaii, as far as I'm concerned.
It's
just a tropical oasis that I can't wait to get to every night.
Well, if it is Frisco, so we have a couple of stringers here. One of whom was Zach's predecessor as the beat writer, John Werner, who was been here for freaking 40 years, but now is a stringer. But he's a Texas State alum, and then I've got another guy, Jason Orts, who's a Texas State alum. I suspect that they would probably go to that game. So I know Orts would, but.
Do you have any, Brice? I'm assuming you've been to Frisco, and this wouldn't be a One True podcast without food discussion. Yeah,
there you go. That's a great question. So, to me, anytime you're in the Metroplex, Kincaid's Hamburgers is a good bet. They have multiple locations, including one in Arlington. How far is Arlington from Frisco? It's all up there. But yeah, I mean, that would be a place. Frisco itself, I'd have to think. I've been to that minor league park there. There's a lot of stuff. Frisco's kind of a highfalutin area, I feel like now, but they have a lot of industry and business up there. So yeah, I may have to get back to Keff on that and think about it. But certainly Kincaid's Hamburgers would be a good bet. So anyway, there you go. For any Bobcat fans heading up there, you're welcome. So, Keff, thanks again, man. And it's kind of funny how we just sort of bookended the season with you, but we'll have to bring you back next year. I don't think, does Baylor play Texas State, Zach?
No, Tarleton, I think, is that's there.
But maybe we'll just bring Keff on just for the heck of it. So
you're a good podcast guest.
I can talk about most things. Before you let me go, I've got a good little note that I thought about with Jake Spavital joining the Baylor staff.
Right.
So the offensive line coach is Eric Mateos at Baylor. He was his first job as a on-field coach was at Texas State as the offensive line coach under Everett Withers. He actually did a really good job. Aaron Brewer, who's a team captain for the Tennessee Titans, that's a player he developed here. One of many good offensive linemen. he was let go by Spavital when Spavital was hired in 2018. And then he kind of went through, similar with offensive coordinators, went through a bunch of offensive line coaches. But, and obviously Mateos went on to BYU, had success, went on to Baylor, has been a pretty good coach there as well. But that's kind of an interesting little deal I'm keeping an eye on, is like now they're on the same offensive staff there in Baylor.
Yeah,
So.
it will be interesting to see if Mateos is still around, just because the offensive line was really bad this year. That and he was kind of a Grimes guy. Grimes brought him in, but we'll see. But that's an interesting connection.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised though if they allow Spav to bring in at least one of his own guys, at one of those offensive positions. Wouldn't you think, Zach?
Yeah, but if there is one head coach that is kind of the psychologist that can smooth over any maybe ill feelings, it's Dave Aranda. So I think if there's one coach for Mateos to stick around with, it would be him. But you're right. I think Spav kind of deserves to bring in his guys, so to speak.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I like that. The coach whisperer, Dave Aranda. I appreciate the question.
Psychologist, Dave Aranda.
I like it. All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for hopping on. See y'all.